Lorelai Gilmore is a woman who prides herself with being independent, self-sufficient, and the complete opposite of her mother. But is she really all that different to Emily? Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, hi. This is Silver Screen Freak, where I talk about movies and TV shows, and one TV show that I have a lot to talk about is none other than Gilmore Girls. So I have come up with this conclusion that this show loves cycles between mothers and daughters, and I want to discuss how I got there and how the daughters are more alike than they would care to admit to their moms. So if you've seen Gilmore Girls in A Year in the Life, then you would know that this show really seems to love cycles and history repeating itself.
Vicious circle.
As we know, Gilmore Girls is a show about Lorelai who gets pregnant at 16 and raises her daughter Rory as a single mom. In The Year in the Life, it ends off basically where Lorelai's story starts, which is Rory finds out she is pregnant and is most likely going to be raising her child as a single mom.
Full freaking circle.
Not only that, but Rory is meant to mirror Lorelai.
You're me. I'm not you.
And it's quite obvious that the father of her baby is Logan, who mirrors Rory's father, Christopher, and that Jess, who is probably the love of Rory's life, mirrors his uncle Luke, who is the love of Lorelai's life. I can go into greater detail about this, but this is not what I'm going to be talking about today. Today I want to discuss about the mother-daughter relationships in the show and how the daughters are more like their moms than they would care to admit, and how Lane and Lorelai's life are very similar. Okay, first up we have Lorelai and Emily. A tale as old as time, at least in the show, Lorelai has often stated that the reason for a lot of the animosity that was there between herself and Emily was she felt suffocated. She felt like her mother never really listened to her or took the time to understand her and her needs and wants, and that Emily had these high expectations of Lorelai that Lorelai could not deliver. Emily's idea of a good mother and daughter relationship was not to be friends, but to be a guide, an example of what makes a good woman for her daughter. For Emily, a good woman is strong, independent, a good and loyal wife, has good taste, and is a member of society. And these are all qualities that Lorelai actually possesses. Like Emily, Lorelai is strong and independent. Lorelai learned how to manage the staff at the inn from watching Emily manage the staff at their home.
I learned from the best.
Like Emily, when Lorelai found the love of her life, she would go above and beyond to do things for him, like shop for his clothes, buy his dad's boat and store it for him, host a Welcome to Stars Hollow dinner for his nephew. Additionally, both Lorelai and Emily have good taste, albeit their tastes are very different, but nonetheless, they like what they own and wear it with pride. And lastly, just as how Emily makes sure to go to functions and host DRR events, Lorelai is very much an active member in Stars Hollow events and functions. And we saw that just like how Lorelai feels that she is always under pressure from Emily, Emily feels the exact same way with Lorelai the First, her mom-in-law, but still. Not as different as you thought, huh? And as we well know by now, Lorelai was not the picture-perfect daughter Emily had envisioned. She would sneak out of the house, drink, lived a more rebellious life in general, until she got pregnant and ran away from home to Stars Hollow. Like Emily, Mrs. Kim has high expectations for her daughter Lane and has a certain perception on what makes a good woman. One who is God-fearing, conservative, hardworking, eats tofu, marries a Korean doctor. And Lane couldn't be more unlike her mom, right? She loves eating fast food, loves rock music, and ends up marrying the lead singer of her band, who is definitely not a Korean doctor. Like Lorelai, Lane too is rebellious. As we saw time and time again, she would lie about her whereabouts, have elaborate plans and routes to avoid her mother in order to live her double life.
Trust God. Is that a band?
No, my life.
Now, it seems like the biggest difference between Lorelai and Lane is that Lane has always been afraid of her mom and has always wanted her mother's approval. And although we have seen glimpses of Lorelai's life before she had Rory, I can't say for certain what their relationship was like and how Lorelai was thinking at that time. Maybe she did want her mom's approval. Maybe she was afraid of her mom as well. But I can't make assumptions on that front. But what we do know is that when push came to shove, when Lorelai finally became a mother, that's when she decided she had to leave because she did not want her daughter to be raised in the same environments that she was raised in, and she knew that she wanted to raise her daughter the way she wanted to, without any interference from her mother. So although it took Lane some time compared to Lorelai, Lorelai was 16, 17 when she moved out, and Lane was probably 20, 21. It was similar because Lane also finally moved out when push came to shove, when her mother found out her double life, and Lane did not want to compromise how she wanted to live her life when her mother wouldn't approve. And like Emily, Mrs. Kim also has strict views on how mothers and daughters should be, where she says children don't make the rules in response to Lane coming up with solutions on how they can coexist. And just like Lorelai and Emily, Lane and Mrs. Kim are more alike than they know. Lane is responsible, capable, and fierce, just like Mrs. Kim. We see this in how she manages the band, her efficiency in Luke's diner, and when she works at Kim's Antiques. And we later realized that Lane's hiding and sneaking is a trait that is long passed down to her from her mother, as we realized that Mrs. Kim does the exact same thing with her mother, who is a devout Buddhist.
This would be another example of a vicious circle.
Now, something I want to point out, which I always thought was a little strange, was we have seen on a couple of occasions where Lorelai actually takes Mrs. Kim's side over Lane's, which was always strange for me because I thought more than anybody Lorelai would relate to Lane because she knows what it's like to be with a demanding mother. When Rory expresses her disapproval of Mrs. Kim and Lorelai says that she actually feels bad for her, and Rory asks why because she's the reason why Lane's kicked out, Lorelai says that she feels bad for Mrs. Kim because she thinks that it must be really hurting her and that she must be feeling really lonely. Which again is another full circle moment because that is exactly what Lorelai did to Emily. She also ran away, and maybe Lorelai realized it then or maybe she didn't, but I think she now can finally sympathize with her own mother and how much pain she must have put her mother through. Which leads into the new cycle of mothers and daughters as we see how Lorelai chooses to raise Rory. Because of the rigid relationship between herself and Emily, Lorelai made it a priority to do basically the exact opposite of what Emily did, which was to be a friend first, mother second, to have an open space for Rory to talk and be herself. But interestingly enough, when Rory starts liking things that Lorelai ran away from, it did lead to a lot of cracks in their relationship. Like when Rory has a good time playing golf and starts bonding with Richard, Rory falling in love with a privileged man. Because essentially that's exactly what happened to herself and Emily. Because Emily couldn't understand the things that gave Lorelai joy. But unlike Emily, Lorelai realized early on that she needs to support what Rory wants and does just that. And even though Lorelai did all of that, it didn't stop Rory from leaving home at one point. A pain that her mother, Emily, knows all too well. Almost like a cycle or history repeating itself.
Miss Gilmore in the vicious circle.
Now, we weren't able to watch Lane long enough to see her as a mother, but there was a scene where she tells Rory that she's going to allow her kids to listen to rock and do whatever they want, to which Rory replies, what if what they want to do is read the Bible and go to church? Which makes Lane a little disappointed at first, but then realizes that that could actually be a possibility and says that if that's what they want to do, then they can. I think this shows how these two women are taking the lessons they've learned into consideration into how they would raise their own children. And along with it comes a lot of understanding of their mothers as well. And I think that by doing this, both these women are healing, firstly, their own childhood traumas between themselves and their moms, as well as they're healing the generational trauma because, as I've mentioned before, both Emily and Mrs. Kim, as we later realized, they've had their own fair share of being on the short end of a mother-daughter relationship. One of the things I love about this show is how full-rounded they created these characters. In the beginning, we see Emily and Mrs. Kim through the eyes of their daughters, demanding mothers who don't understand their daughters. But I think as these daughters became mothers themselves and just grew up and, had more life experience, I think they kind of had more understanding of their mothers and see them in a very different light. Similarly, as their relationships went through really tough times, I think their mothers also had the tough pill to swallow, which was that all they've ever wanted was the best for their daughters, but they had to realize and come to terms with the fact that what they think is the best for them may not be what is the best for their daughters. So I think after both Emily and Mrs. Kim realized that, that's when all of their relationships started to do really well.
I am not going to get in your way.
Oh, I know. This house is not for me. It's for you.
Me?
You and Luke.
So yeah, growing up is just basically realizing that Emily and Mrs. Kim are not villains at all. These are just two women who raised very strong women themselves, wanted the best for them, realizing that what they think is the best may not be what's best for their daughters, and coming to that realization, meeting their daughters halfway, and the daughters in turn, they're healing their own childhoods. They're healing themselves by the way they choose to raise their children. So anyways, what do you guys think? Have you guys ever noticed these similarities between Lane and Lorelai and in turn to their mothers, Mrs. Kim and Emily? Are there any things that I left out? Let me know down in the comments. Please like this video and please subscribe to my channel. It means a lot to me. Thanks, I'll see you in the next one. Bye!